Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Good morning, yes, we can hear you well. Good morning.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning. My virtual background. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the opening session. How do organizations learn for Evaluation Week 2020? We're just giving our participants a few more moments to join us. We will be getting started in just a few minutes. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I think we can go ahead and get started. It looks as though we have about 68 participants with us. So welcome to you all. And welcome to the African Development Bank's Evaluation Week 2020 and to this year's opening session entitled, How Do Organizations Learn? We will be building on the discussions that began yesterday during the closed events of this year's Evaluation Week, namely the IDEV Operations Clinic and the SDG Knowledge Event, which included our counterparts from the government of Uganda and the bank's statistics department. For this morning's opening session, allow me to share our agenda. But before I do that, let me conduct a bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. If you do not feel comfortable with this, we kindly ask you to log out now. This event will be available online soon after the close of the ceremony. We are also live streaming this event on the bank's Facebook and YouTube page for those who are unable to join us via Zoom. This webinar also offers simultaneous interpretation in English and French. Please use the interpretation button provided at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And following the keynote address, there will be time for question and answers. Please include your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A section to submit one. We kindly ask that you include your name, organization, and direct your question to one of our speakers. Now, with this part finished, we can begin our program. Good morning again to everyone. My name is Christin Roby, a member of the bank's Communication and External Relations Department, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as your Master of Ceremony this morning. Whether you're joining us here in Abidjan, from anywhere across the African continent, or wherever you may sit in the world, we're glad that you have decided to join us. We are happy to have with us bank shareholders, bank management and staff, policymaker and decision makers, development partners, evaluation institutions, civil society, and private sector. Welcome again to you all. The Evaluation Week is a biennial global event, knowledge event, with the main goal of facilitating conversations on the role of development evaluation in the delivery of the SDGs. This year, we will tackle the following questions. What will it take to quickly and effectively learn from evaluation during and after the COVID-19 crisis? Why and how should African countries use data and information from evaluation to enhance the achievement of the SDGs and sustainable development outcomes? What does effective learning entail? And of course, we will hear lessons learned from evaluations that led to actions, evaluations that made a difference. This session will begin with welcome remarks from the Acting Evaluator General of the African Development Bank, Ms. Karen Rot-Munstermann, followed by opening remarks from Acting Senior Vice President, Swazi Tshabalala. Tshabalala will be followed by the keynote address, The Essence of Learning by Governments and Development Organizations in Africa to fast-track delivery of the SDGs in light of COVID-19. And this morning's keynote speaker is Mr. Peter Van Rooij, Deputy Regional Director of the International Labour Organization's Regional Africa Office. I would now like to pass the floor to Ms. Karen Rot-Munster for her welcome remarks. Karen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Independent Development Evaluation, I would like to welcome you all to the 2020 AfDB Development Evaluation Week. This year, we have organized Evaluation Week under the theme From Learning to Transformational Change in Africa, and will focus on how effective learning from evaluation is linked to the delivery of sustainable development results against the backdrop of the global COVID-19 pandemic. Over the next 2 days, discussions will center on the role of development evaluation in supporting African countries to speed up the delivery of the SDGs, We're excited to welcome Peter van Rooij, who will deliver the keynote address on the essence of learning by governments and development organizations in Africa to fast-track delivery of the SDGs in the light of COVID-19. More precisely, we will examine how learning from evaluations can best be applied to enhance the design and implementation of development projects and programs, and can help improve policies, strategies, and processes, and thus pave the way for improved sustainable development outcomes. We will also explore how the move from learning to action occurs, and how organizations can learn from the successes and mistakes of the past in order to improve the future. In my experience, what is essential to get from learning to action is to have a culture in the institution that is willing to admit shortcomings and mistakes and recognizes that there are always ways to improve, and an institution that is focused on results, providing appropriate incentives to take these lessons into account. What this also means is that there needs to be close collaboration between the independent evaluation function and the management of the institution. While evaluation needs to preserve its independence, to speak truth to power, it also needs to engage with management to ensure that lessons are taken on board. Independence does not mean isolation, and engagement is a two-way street. I would like to highlight that the AfDB is committed to learning from past experience, and we have established excellent working relationships with many colleagues in the management of the bank, which has also helped in moving to action more quickly than we might have otherwise. But as always, there is still room to improve. Ladies and gentlemen, it's probably an understatement to say that we are living in extraordinary times. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced us all to adapt the way we work, including at the bank. For the first time ever, we're thus taking the evaluation week fully virtual, with all the keynote speeches, presentations, and panel discussions taking place via Zoom. As you will have seen, despite the challenges we are facing, we have a rich and exciting program that promises to be both engaging and informative. There is truly something for everyone, and I encourage you all to actively participate by asking questions and providing comments in the chat box, as we want these webinars to be as interactive as possible. I also want to highlight that this year marks 40 years since the creation of an evaluation function at the AfDB. We have just organized a conversation that I'm particularly looking forward to tomorrow, which will examine how evaluation has evolved over time into the department it is today. The evaluation journey at the AfDB has been an interesting one. And as we reflect back on the last 40 years, we'll be able to see how far we have come as an institution, how the evaluation function has improved over time, and how we can continue to improve. So I look forward to the next chapter of this journey as we work to deliver on our core mandate, which is to contribute to a better bank, achieving greater development results in Africa. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you again to this virtual evaluation week. And I invite the acting Senior Vice President, Tshabalala, to give her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Good morning to our distinguished panelists, executive directors, everyone participating today. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you, including the many distinguished guests joining us for the African Development Bank's 2020 Evaluation Week. This year's event will be remarkable for several reasons. To begin with, there are only 10 years left to deliver on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and as such, this year's Evaluation Week is aptly themed From Learning to Transformational Change in Africa, Accelerating Africa's Delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals in the Decade of Action. The 2020 Global Sustainable Development Report notes that while progress has been made in many areas, it considers it unlikely that all goals and targets will be met. By 2030. The bank group will need to step up by playing its part with its high 5 priority areas. The COVID-19 pandemic has put at risk many of the economic gains that Africa has achieved over the past few decades and has compelled countries and development organizations alike to quickly modify their annual development plans and reallocate resources in response to the crisis and its downside effects. It has also led us at the African Development Bank to rethink how we work, and as a result, for the first time ever, we conducted our annual meetings virtually. We are also now seeing our very first virtual evaluation week with a series of interactive online sessions that will feature presentations and panel discussions, as well as a capacity development clinic. This year is not only remarkable in terms of the current COVID-19 pandemic, but also because it marks 40 years since the founding of an evaluation function at the African Development Bank. From its humble beginnings as a small unit to a fully fledged independent department that reports directly to the board of directors, the evaluation function at the bank has gone from strength to strength over the course of the last 40 years. Indeed, the Independent Development Evaluation Department, or IDEV, as we know it colloquially, has played a key role in helping to build a better bank and fostering a culture of evaluation, both within the institution and in its regional member countries. The bank group's management emphasizes the importance of promoting a culture of results and accountability in transforming the bank group into a world-class learning institution. The bank makes good use of IDEV's evaluations, and to cite a few recent examples, the evaluation of the bank's development and business delivery model was a key input to inform the bank group's historic 7th general capital increase that was concluded last year. Furthermore, following the evaluation of quality assurance throughout the project cycle, this helps us to put together an action plan which is now central to the bank's efforts to increase the quality and development impact of our operation, and includes an operations academy for training our staff. The evaluation of the integrated safeguard system helped us to significantly strengthen the implementation of environmental and social safeguards, while the gender evaluation informed on how we can best proceed with gender mainstreaming, and through the recent evaluations of the private sector development strategy and access to finance, these will help us to better serve the private sector. And the list goes on. The success of IDEV and of the bank's evaluation week are a testament to the importance that the bank attributes to learning from evaluation. Collectively, we are continuously striving to do better, ensuring that evaluation findings make their way into the projects, programs, and strategies of the future. My participation, as well as that of so many of the bank staff and managers, is evidence of how serious we are about giving full attention to learning for the ultimate improvement of results. That is why this year's evaluation week is focusing on from learning to transformational change in Africa. It is great that we also have so many experts and distinguished guests from the continent and from across the world joining us on this journey. It will be crucial for us, as well as African governments and development bodies, as we look ahead, to appreciate the link between learning and development effectiveness, and to put in place mechanisms so that evaluations trigger effective learning. It is only in doing so that development results can be achieved and sustained through transformational change as we I seem to have been muted there, sorry. It is only in doing so that development results can be achieved and sustained through transformational change as we strive to deliver on the SDGs by 2030 and to accelerate Africa's economic transformation, guided by the bank's strategic priorities, the high fives, to light up and power Africa, feed Africa, integrate Africa, industrialize Africa, and improve the quality of life for all Africans. During this evaluation week, we will explore how learning from evaluations can be systematized to enhance the design and implementation of development projects and programs, and thereby pave the way for improved sustainable development outcomes. We will also discuss how organizations learn and how we can strengthen and accelerate the move from learning to action and improve results. We are delighted to welcome keynote speaker Peter van Rooij, Deputy General Director for Africa at the ILO, who will provide his unique perspective on the essence of learning by governments and development organizations in Africa to fast-track delivery of the SDGs in light of COVID-19. I very much look forward to his keynote address. And with this, I would like to welcome you once again to this year's virtual evaluation week, and I wish you successful discussions in the coming days. Ultimately, we want to take full advantage of the insights and lessons from so many experts to help us improve results for our own high five priority areas, which will assist us to meet the SDGs for Africa. I thank you all.
Thank you, VP Tshabalala, for those opening remarks. I just would like to remind participants that simultaneous interpretation is available. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will notice a globe-like world icon that allows for English or French. I would now like to ask the technical team to prepare for us our keynote address. Unfortunately, Peter van Rooij, ILO's Deputy Regional Director for Africa, cannot join us today, but he did send us his keynote message.
Hello, everybody. Greetings from Deux Plateaux in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. My name is Peter van Rooij. I am the Deputy Regional Director for the ILO based in Abidjan for our regional office that covers the whole of Africa. The ILO, as you know, is the organization as part of the United Nations family that works on decent work for all. We work with governments, employers and workers, and in the case of our office, we support 54 countries in Africa. And I am very pleased, and I want to thank colleagues of the African Development Bank for having invited us for the evaluation week together with colleagues, and I look forward to participate in this event through this keynote speech, but also hopefully through other activities. And I know other ILO colleagues will be participating in various capacities as well. So first of all, thanks to the organizers, Aminata, Olive, Marguilin, Jacqueline, Dieter, and others with whom I've been in contact, because I know organizing these kind of events is a lot of work. Especially a virtual event, and I'll come back to that, but also for organizing an important event, the Evaluation Week. I know it's postponed, and I am really pleased to be part of that, and I would like to also endorse the importance of this. Like the ILO, and we work closely with the African Development Bank on a number of topics, For us, evaluation and related topics, learning, training, knowledge management, and others are very important for the work we do. But I'll come back to that. So first of all, here I am virtually with you. And I've been asked to talk to you about the essence of learning by governments and development partners, development organizations in Africa, to fast-track the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, in the light of COVID-19. That's one sentence, and it's quite a sentence. Because if you unpack the different elements of this, you would have a number of them, and quite important. And each of them I could easily speak for quite some time. So if we unpack it, we have the essence, 1. We have learning, 2. We have governments and development organizations, and I put them together, but they are complementing one another, and I'll come back to that as well. We have the geographical focus, Africa, of course, and that's something else that brings us together. We have fast track, the pacing of our work, very important, and I'll come back to that as well. We have the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals as part of the United Nations, where member states came together and had the vision of what progress we want to achieve by 2030 in an ambitious way. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is COVID-19, as if there isn't enough to talk about with the other items. And COVID-19 is an important one. Just the fact that I'm talking to you like this, just the fact that we have a virtual event is an indication of how much the world is different from 1 year ago. Who would have thought? 1 year ago, if you would have said that we would be hit by something that covers the whole globe in all the aspects of our life, where unfortunately many people would be affected, and we've had quite a number of losses across the globe, and many of us know of people who have passed away. But also how this has impacted the work of our organizations, making sure that our staff are all right, and at the same time seeing where we can somehow continue our work, adapt to the new reality, respond to the additional challenges, but also see that we can identify the opportunities. And we have seen a lot. I don't know how many of you feel that it's almost normal that we are working from home and being able to do quite a lot as compared to having worked in the office. Now, this is something that is not normal. And of course, this is a transition, so we'll see where this is going. But there will be important changes. Now, I'm saying this because this is a great learning imposed on us. We've learned a lot, and for sure we will be learning more. So that is the first thing when we talk about the essence of learning. COVID-19 has forced us to learn a lot. Some of the things that we are now doing are not new, but they were accelerated by COVID. So COVID-19 is something that cuts across and really impacted us in a broad manner. But let's now go to the learning more specifically. And in this regard, I want to be inspired by an article that I also wrote for the African Development Bank on the 4 questions on knowledge management. As I mentioned before, training, learning, evaluation, knowledge management, knowledge sharing, these are topics that have a lot in common. They're not the same, they're differences, but there are similarities and there are important complementarities. So in this article on the 4 questions of knowledge management, I see some linkages with the learning, because the first question that I ask is, to what extent are we clear about the knowledge needs? Well, let me straight away put it in the context of learning. We do a lot of learning all through our lives. And this is also something that we encourage in the ILO, looking ahead to the future of work. We know the future of work is about lifelong learning. We never cease to learn. But it's not learning for the sake of learning. And this is why it is very important for our work, African Development Bank, ILO, other organizations, in support of our constituents, in the case of the ILO, governments, employers, and workers' organizations, member states, that we support them in their learning. So the first question is to have more clarity about the learning for what? What are the learning needs? And although this is easier said than done, and it sounds perhaps a bit academic, and in part it is, but it is something that deserves more attention, because better understanding the learning needs, including the why, can help us to be more focused on the learning, the what and the how. So that's the first question. The second question that derives of a better understanding of the learning needs is about what have we learned already? As organizations, we have a wealth of experience. We've learned a lot. We have monitored, we have evaluated, we have gained experiences, we have gained insight, competencies. In fact, a lot is referred to as lessons learned, which, by the way, in my view, is something that needs to be rephrased in many cases, because many of the cited lessons learned, when you scratch the surface, you see these are not necessarily new findings. So rather than lessons learned, they are perhaps mistakes repeated. Now, I'm not saying this to be grammatically correct, and I am not the one who came up with this, there's a reference to lessons to be learned rather than lessons learned. I think it's more correct because it's not only focusing on the lesson, but also the learning. So lessons to be learned, I think, is more modesty in terms of have we really learned it, or are we in the process of learning it? And importantly as well, that we focus on how are we going to learn? How do we make sure that this is a lesson that we are incorporating, that this is not a repeat that will be a mistake that will be repeated? So we're learning a lot. We have a wealth of experience and expertise, a wealth of knowledge. So that's the second question that I put out there, because if we have more clarity on the learning needs in the first place, then the next step is to see what do we know already? What have we learned? What knowledge do we have? And that brings me to the third question, which is the gap between the learning needs and the knowledge that we have, the learning we have already done in a way, is what part of that can be filled, that gap, by others, other development organizations, other organizations such as academia, constituents themselves. So that is an important way of reducing that gap, building on the learning of others. And that then leads us to the fourth question, the gap between the real learning needs, what needs to be learned, building on what we have and what others have, then focus on the real learning, that learning that is yet to be done. So those are the four questions that I put out there on knowledge management, but as you heard, I think they are very relevant also for learning. They can help us not only to be more focused in which direction to learn, not learning for the sake of learning, but to be focused so that we can also make the best use of our resources, time included. But also to make sure that we do the necessary learning and not more, that we don't reinvent the wheel, that we can work with others, which also allows us to build partnerships and to come together in other ways. I'll come back to that. So that's my first message of 3 that I want to leave you with in this keynote speech. 4 questions on learning, essence of learning that will help us in our work as organizations to support our constituents, our member states. And that transitions me to my second point, which is about the learning needs, the learning of the constituents, the people, the organizations that we work for, if you wish, our clients. Once again, in the case of the ILO, they are governments, employers and workers organizations. In the case of our regional office, all in Africa. And this is very important, so that our learning is not an end in itself. Our learning as ILO, African Development Bank and others is a means to an end, is to enable the learning of our clients, our constituents. And there we've made a lot of progress. If I take a technical example of, for example, vocational training, something that the ILO is very active on, we have a training center in Turin in Italy, that is specialized in learning, in training, in methodologies related to that. And I can clearly see an evolution through time, whereas in the past we would focus on the training of individuals who could be vocational training specialists, who could be trainers in skills training. We've evolved from that. Doesn't mean that it doesn't take place in any case, but it has been shifted. The emphasis has shifted more towards how can we focus on the capacity of these organizations. So shifting towards training of trainers, so that these organizations, these countries have the capacity themselves to train the people needed. Because it doesn't make sense for us to train each individual. And there we have made further progress as well. Increasingly, we strengthen the capacity of the institutions of our constituents, of our clients, if you wish. And I think that's very important. That's my second message, to focus the learning, the essence of learning, on the capacity of institutions, of the organizations that we are there to support. So how can we help them to do the learning themselves, to identify the learning, to manage the learning, the process, the prioritization with our support. And key in this is ownership. Ownership by these organizations to identify the learning, to manage the learning, but also by ownership to take the necessary ownership by definition of this learning. That will have an impact in terms of the results. That will also show in sustainability of results. So ownership is very important. It's key of these institutions that we are there to support. That's part of the essence of learning. The ILO, learning for the sake of learning of the ILO, has very little value unless this learning is put in the context of supporting our constituents, the learning of these institutions. So that's my second message, that we can focus increasingly the learning on the capacity development of institutions that we're there to support. The learning capacities of these organizations. And that's where these 4 questions that I shared with you before can be very relevant. In the ILO, we're making progress on this, including a new policy on capacity development of institutions. So happy to share with you in case anybody is interested, because I think it's very important that we learn on learning together. And that relates to my third and last message that I want to leave behind through this keynote speech, which is working together as development organizations and as development organizations together to support our constituents, our members, member states. And this is where I would like to refer to 2 keywords: partnerships and scaling up. It is essential that with the needs that are out there, reinforced by COVID, some perhaps new or in a new form because of COVID, we cannot afford to have our limited resources not optimally used. It's very important that we work together. As I mentioned, before in the 4 key questions, I think there are opportunities to help in the learning by building on our knowledge, our respective learnings, to help others and eventually the organizations, the member states, the constituents for whom we are there. And in this regard, I would like to give an example of how important this is. Because in a previous capacity, I was in a country where we were doing a lot on youth employment. So Development Bank. And we did a lot. In fact, so much that we took the initiative to see with the government of what was actually done the last few years there. And we found out that over a period of 5 years, there had been 250 projects on youth employment in this country. 250 projects on one topic in 5 countries. Each of them an initiative, each of them a pilot, each of them starting the learning, each of them somehow assuming that the pilot would be brought to scale if successful. And very few did. Now, that doesn't mean there was no cooperation whatsoever. There was. But there was a real lack of a vision and work together, including on the learning. So imagine 250 parallel initiatives, 250 parallel learnings. Imagine what could have been done, not only in terms of the synergies that could have been realized by all of these initiatives coming together, but also to enhance bringing it to scale through enhanced ownership by government, but also the learning, the enhanced learning that could have taken place because of these partnerships. So partnerships and scaling up are crucial for us to advance the learning, to advance the work that we do on evaluation to support our member states. So my time is almost up, almost 20 minutes. I want to leave you with these 3 messages. The 4 questions on learning based on needs, what we have, what others have, to have a focused learning. Secondly, to focus the learning on the learning of our ultimate clients, beneficiaries, constituents, in the case of the ILO, government, employers and workers. And thirdly, that we enhance our learning in partnerships with a view for scaling up of results, of sustainability, but also the learning, the scaling up the learning. So with that, I want to thank you very much. I wish you a great evaluation week. I look forward to participate and build on the results with colleagues in the ILO. Thank you very much. I think this is going to be fantastic. And I want to really wish you the best. And once again, thank you to the African Development Bank. We look forward to build on this and continue to work with you. All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Peter van Rooij. We heard a lot from him in his remarks. He discussed how COVID-19 has forced us to learn and has reinforced the essence of learning. We heard about what he calls the 4 questions of knowledge management and the linkages between learning and this concept. He said we need to gain clarity and define the learning needs and recognize not only our lessons learned, but what he calls the lessons to be learned. He discussed how to close the gap between the learning needs by learning from other organizations and institutions to build on what we know and use the knowledge to reduce the number of lessons to be learned and create partnerships. He urged us to focus the essence of learning on the capacity of institutions in line with our development goals to support our clients, that organizations must take ownership to identify the learning and to actually share knowledge beyond our institutions, to develop capacity of local institutions and the individuals we seek to support. Peter also discussed partnerships at scale as a means to support our member states and constituents, and he discussed enhanced learning that comes from these type of partnerships. He really has given us a lot to think about in terms of fast-tracking learning to deliver on the SDGs in this last decade. I look forward to subsequent sessions and building on this topic. Unfortunately, we will not have time for question and answers right now. And in fact, we will include them after our panel session, before the closing of this actual opening ceremony. So we ask for anyone who would like to interject or be included in the conversation to please use the chat box or the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So I would like to thank all of our speakers who have been with us this morning, and we will now transition to the panel portion of this opening ceremony. With that, I would like to invite Ms. Martha Phiri, Director of the Human Capital, Youth and Skills Development Department, to take the floor as she will serve for the moderator of this panel portion of the opening ceremony. Good morning, Martha. Over to you.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you very much. Good morning to you and good morning to everybody. Senior Vice President, Executive Directors of the board, and distinguished panelists and everybody joining us this morning. It's my pleasure to host the first panel for discussion this morning. And I'm very, very delighted to share with you the topic for discussion. The topic is how organizations can become effective learners to achieve better development outcomes. And I have the pleasure to introduce to you three distinguished experts to discuss this topic. Please join me, first of all, to welcome our first expert, Mr. Chris Chalmers, Executive Director for Italy, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands at the African Development Bank. E.D. Chalmers is the current chairman of the Committee on Operations and Development Effectiveness at the bank's board of directors. Previously, he was head of strategy at the UK Department for International Development, where he led work on the UK's 26th Bilateral and Development Review and 2015 UK Aid Strategy. Our second panelist, Dr. Khaled Sherif, is Vice President for Regional Development, Integration, and Business Delivery at the African Development Bank. He oversees bank sovereign operations via 5 regional hubs, 31 country offices, and 5 liaison offices. Dr. Sherif guides the bank's regional integration agenda and its engagement in fragile situations. Currently, he oversees the implementation of the COVID-19 response facility. Lastly, but certainly not least, join me in welcoming our third panelist, Dr. Awesi Uku, Chief Learning and Development Officer, African Development Bank, Human Resources Department. As the bank's Chief Learning and Development Officer, Dr. Oku leads and coordinates all aspects of the bank's staff capacity development, leadership development, and e-learning. She is currently the project manager of the bank's work from home and return to office. She's also the project manager on the implementation of the economic dividends for gender equality in the bank and manages the bank's young professional program. So that's the lineup we have for us for our first panel. And you have set us off through the remarks from Mr. Van Rooij, as well as the opening remarks from the SVP. So we're off to a great start. And I would like to invite the panelists, starting with you, E.D. Chalmers, first of all, to share your thoughts on the topic of today. Your perspectives based on the experience that you have at the board, but also with your previous experiences. You will respond to the question and share your thoughts, and I'll give you 3 minutes. Thereafter, I'll give each panelist 3 minutes to do the same. After which, I will then engage with you by asking questions to which you will respond. Thereafter, then we will open up the session to the audience to answer questions and answers. So over to you, Edie Chalmers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martha. And let me start also by thanking the Independent Development Evaluation team for organizing this event here at the Africa Development Bank, and for all of our audience for joining us today. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to do my very best to keep to 3 minutes for you, Martha. But please forgive me if I do run over ever so slightly. So the question that we've been asked to give some thoughts on is, how can organizations become effective learners to achieve better development outcomes? And the first thing that I wanted to say is that I do think it is quite easy for us to know what a learning organization is. It's quite easy to identify a learning organization. A learning organization is one that is successful at achieving its objectives, whether those objectives are making a profit, achieving development impacts, or any other of a huge range of objectives that any organization may have. It will be, if it is an organization that is able to learn, then it will be successful at achieving those objectives. It will be an organization that is innovative, where ideas are bubbling up inside the organization all the time, and staff in the organization are confident enough to try those ideas out. And it will be an organization that is a happy organization, an organization that staff are pleased to work for, interested to work for, and feel safe and supported working for it. So that's what a learning organization, or an organization that is good at learning, will look like. So it's easy to describe. It may be that some of us think that it's quite hard for an organization to get to that situation. But I also don't actually think that this is that difficult. It's a topic that perhaps is suited to quite a lot of technical words and jargon, but in essence, for me, this is about the culture that an organization has. A culture which is not so much about the rules that the organization has or the systems that it has, but it's about the way it treats its staff. It's about the expectations that its staff feel on themselves. And it's about the example that all staff, particularly leaders, but not only leaders, the example that they set in the way that they carry out their jobs every day. And in the end, this is distilled for me into the question of, how does the organization manage when it makes a mistake, or when it does something less well than it wanted to do it? And this is back to the keynote speaker and his point about lessons to be learned and mistakes repeated. So if an organization is not an organization that is good at learning, then when it makes a mistake, it might take a long time to identify and acknowledge that it did so. And when finally it does do that, it might start pointing fingers. It might start looking to see who it can blame for the mistake. On the other hand, if it's an organization that is good at learning, it will be an organization that encourages openness and encourages honesty. And it may even go so far as to celebrate when it identifies a clear lesson from which it can learn. So does it celebrate the identification of a mistake? Does it identify that mistake quickly? And does it learn from that mistake? That's what it needs to do if it is going to become a learning organization. And to finish, in my own experience, I've seen this at first hand in a part of an organization that I once worked in, which very truthfully went in the course of 1 year from being an organization where the staff were fearful, the staff certainly did not feel confident even to come up with ideas, let alone try them out. And in the course of 1 year, all of that was turned around to becoming an organization that was full of ideas and full of confidence. And that transition in that example, which genuinely only took 1 year, was all about a new set of leadership, and a leadership that valued learning, valued ideas, valued innovation. And that was embraced by all the staff in the organization very quickly. And I do think that humans themselves are naturally good learners, naturally innovators. And organizations in the end are only a collection of people. So organizations also should naturally be like this. They're not always, but it doesn't take long to get there if they genuinely want to. So my message on this is actually that this is not difficult. It's quite simple. It just takes a will, and then we can get there. Thanks, Martha.
Thank you, Chalmers. Organizations need to encourage openness, and they need to learn from their mistakes. Humans are naturally good learners. And I think this perhaps gives me an opportunity to turn to you, VP Khaled, to also give your thoughts on the topic, how organizations can become effective learners to achieve better development outcomes, again, building on what Chalmers has shared. Over to you, VP Khaled.
Oh, thank you very much, Martha, it's good to join all of you. So first, what I wanted to do was position my remarks in the few minutes that I have based on the 30 plus years of experience I've had in multilateral organizations. And just to begin by talking about what in multilateral development institutions doesn't work. So we know what doesn't work is we do not learn by misrepresenting facts or data. I think we have a perfect example of that in one of the initiatives that a sister organization carried out, where it attempted to effectively rate countries based on their ability to make their business climate more open to investors. A country, having seen where it was rated lower on the totem pole, fought to change the methodology that was used in that exercise and managed to raise itself by 78 points to completely elevate itself from where it was before. It went from the country that was 128 in the world in terms of doing business to becoming the 68th country in terms of effectiveness of attracting foreign investment. So we definitely don't learn by misrepresenting facts or data. We don't learn by failing to learn from our mistakes. So typically when I see a country that has major disbursement challenges for projects, just the fact that we have headroom doesn't mean that we keep on lending to that particular country, where a country borrows but then doesn't disperse, and then we end up stacking up projects that all have disbursement problems because we're unable to recognize that the projects that came before had disbursement problems, and we haven't acknowledged why that was and how we fixed it. We don't learn by claiming success where it does not exist. So for example, this whole discussion by many across different multilaterals making the claim that we have tackled extreme poverty. There is nothing statistically that I have seen that can actually prove just that mere insinuation that we have tackled extreme poverty. We have made strides towards addressing extreme poverty, but we have not tackled it. So let's not claim success where success doesn't exist. We do not learn by doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. So when we have projects in particular types that are not successful, we just shouldn't try and try again, but start thinking about what works and what doesn't work. And this is why we learn by doing quality economic sector work before project preparation. We learn by quality project completion reports what projects are finished and to make sure we have the lessons learned. We learn by quality evaluations that basically tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly of everything we do. And just as importantly, we learn from audits. Audits tell us where we've succeeded and where we failed. So unless we have a very strong evaluations department, well-staffed and budgeted, unless we have a strong audit function, well-staffed and well-budgeted, unless we have allocations, good allocations, budget allocations to do proper economic sector work, proper budget allocations to do project completion reports, this is a formula for not learning. We have to learn from other multilaterals. We have to learn by becoming a knowledge bank, and this is why economic sector work is so important. So to become a knowledge bank, we have to understand problems, design solutions and approaches, and just as importantly for projects, have a proper log frame with excellent execution. And the reason we need a proper log frame with excellent execution is because it gives us that clarity of mission. So to be a learning organization, for everything from our projects, what they intend to do, to our global mission, you have to have that clarity of mission. At the project level, that is the log frame. And the log frame ensures that staff understand, that our clients understand what we're trying to achieve and what resources are being used for. We learn from experimentation, how we provide staff with the freedom to pursue risks and to innovate. We learn from knowledge transfer, how we align our systems to maximize knowledge transfer, and to make sure that our systems don't allow us to make mistakes. Automation allows us not to make mistakes. We learn from teamwork and collaboration to ensure that there's a culture that facilitates and promotes teamwork so we can have our best knowledge across teams all working together in tandem. And then finally, we learn through strong leadership. As long as strong leadership exists in the multilateral sphere, supporting staff in their efforts to continuously advance, innovate, and build a culture of success becomes key. So just to close, let's understand what is basically the culture that prevents us from learning. And as I said, the culture that prevents us from learning is when we misrepresent facts or data, when we fail to learn from our mistakes, when we claim success where it doesn't exist. If we can eliminate these three things, focus our work on making sure that we have quality ESWs, quality PCRs, quality evaluations and audits, then we become an organization that learns, and we truly become what is known as a knowledge bank. Let me stop there, Martha, back to you.
Thanks, VP Khaled, and thank you for highlighting very, very clear the clarity of mission, strong leadership, and culture of success among the very key, characteristics of an organization that can be a successful learner. So now let me turn to you, Dr. Oku, and for you also to share with the audience your thoughts on the topic, and from your experience, build on the key issues that the two experts have shared with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Karen, for organizing this. Thank you, panelists. I just want to build on what Mr. Chambers and Mr. Khaled said. Forward-thinking leadership is what enables organizations to continue to learn, to continue to transform, to continue to impact knowledge that does not just build the internal capacity, but enables delivery on organizations' business. So forward-thinking leadership is not just good leadership, is more appreciated when it is forward-thinking. And one of the things that also enable a knowledge organization or a learning organization, like my co-panelists have said, is the ability to learn in teams, the ability to share knowledge, the ability to learn from mistakes, and the ability to have a long life learning style. When an organization has a long life learning style, it enables generational blending and enables generational growth. So as one generation leads an organization, there's effective knowledge transfer so that the next generation carries on and just adapts to fit into their current circumstances of operation or into the current business case of the organization. So I think I will just touch a bit on internal learning and what it does to an organization. Internal learning enables the development of staff, and we know that it is this staff that deliver externally on the business case of any organization. So if they're not well equipped internally, they cannot give externally what they don't have. So internal learning within an organization powers the organization's deliverables to its clients and to its partners. Then internal learning also enables successful career pathing for staff, which acts as a motivator for enhanced delivery. It ensures that knowledge management becomes the norm in an institution. So how does that enable our development work? Let me be specific to the bank. I use the bank as an example. Our partners trust us because they know that first, when we come, we're coming to enable. We're not coming with any political agenda. So the bank has a convening power when it comes to knowledge sharing, when it comes to enabling our partners, our governments, to build sustainable systems, when it comes to strengthening the health systems, the educational systems, and all that. Because they trust us, we just come to impact knowledge. We also work with our development partners, and therefore it is important that whatever we learn internally is linked into what our other development partners are doing. Like Mr. Khaled said, we make mistakes, but we learn from mistakes. That is what learning is all about. Learning from mistakes, owning up to them, and ensuring that we develop strategies to overcome such mistakes, whether it is through effective auditing or through assessment of the redevelopment impact that we are making on the ground. So I think for me, universal access to learning within an organization enables sustainable development of our countries, of our partner, and enables enhanced relationship with our partners. It also enables us as an organization to remain relevant in all times. Like during this time of COVID, if you take what has happened within the bank, learning has just blossomed like it has never been before. So how do we leverage on the knowledge that is being exchanged now so that after post-COVID, we integrate this knowledge back into the system to improve the way that the bank is working? COVID will end one day, but we don't want the learning appetite that has increased during this COVID period to wind down when COVID ends. So how do we as an organization ensure that we're developing strategies that keep staff engaged, keep staff learning, and enable the bank to become a long life learning organization? And therefore, to round up, I just want to stress that whatever an organization is able to deliver externally is powered by the knowledge that the bank, that its staff has internally. And therefore, if we're not planning or learning to respond to the development challenges of our partners or of our operations, if we're not planning our trainings or our learnings to respond to delivery on the business case, then we cannot be seen to be effective. We cannot be seen to be creating an environment where there's open dialogue, where there's trust, where people can learn from each other. We're not enabling teams learning. We're not enabling things like knowledge series where people can come together and learn from peer-to-peer learning. I think these are the things that we need to do to ensure that we remain a learning organization and that our learning impacts our development, our business deliveries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have a fourth panelist that has joined from the ILO, and I would like to invite Mr. Ricardo Furman, Senior Monitoring and Evaluation Officer at the International Labour Organization. You're joining us where Dr. Oku is concluding her remarks on the fact that if we are to effectively deliver externally our programs, our interventions as an institution, we have to make sure that we build the capacity to learn internally. Now, I'd like to invite you to react to the topic for today. And the topic is how organizations can become effective learners to achieve better development outcomes. So building on this and the feedback or reactions that we have from the panelists, if you could share your thoughts with the audience, please. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the African Development Bank for the invitation as panelists for this event that, of course, takes a major point that has been stressed by the previous panelist and by Peter van Rogen. So I don't want to repeat what has been said or reiterate. But basically, I would like to share, let's say, 4 points that are the way that in also from my experience and how in ILO we try to work in embedding an organizational learning that is not only within, but with our constituents that are the government, the member states, the employers organization, the worker organizations, and how this can be really embedded in the full of the needs in terms of the mission of ILO toward decent work and social justice. So basically, it was mentioned before the importance of having good evaluation, quality appraisal, that all this, and all this is very important, and we find this very important. I work a lot in doing management, oversight, implementing independent evaluations of different subjects and so on in Africa. But maybe a point that it would be important to stress is the need to have a clear infrastructure, social and technical infrastructure in the organization to make that the full staff, the different programs officers, project officers, etc., really make learning as part of their culture, and evaluations are also part of their culture. So I think that for that it's important that we have an environment in which you facilitate learning, in which there is the infrastructure, if you want to call it, methodologies, tools that can work on that. So complementing independent evaluation, it's important to have good, strong M&E programs, systems, strategies, and staff well prepared for that. And we're in ILO, for instance, we are moving more in Africa to M&E officers that are M&E and sharing knowledge officers, because we are clear that all the reflections, ongoing reflection, has to be part oriented to share learning. And this means to promote learning in the staff and in the constituencies, in the different organizations that work with us and that we are work for them and that we have to work with them. So it's not only about reporting numbers, it's not about what we achieved or what we didn't achieve it, but it's also about to capture the whole land. Something that I didn't hear yet, but it's important, is what is the tacit knowledge? What is the knowledge that we can capture in terms of qualitative, but also in between lines that help all of us during the implementation to work. We are talking about sometimes our real-time evaluation, for instance, how we can move to that. It's something that in ILO we're exploring more. We complement all this with evaluations that are more thematic evaluation that go cross over the organization in thematic areas that help to reflect and produce reports. And these reports are discussed at the management level and are also discussed with ILO staff through webinars in which we discuss how the recommendations can be applied from the evaluations and how all this can go. One more point that I would like to highlight in this area, is just to try to finalize, is basically in our evaluation process, we are very keen to make this as participatory as process as possible in terms of including the stakeholders, not only our direct constituency, government, employer associations and unions, but also other stakeholders that are involved in our process through decent work, to really discuss from the design of the evaluation through the implementation of the evaluation, and also to discuss the findings, and to discuss these findings at the stage of discussing with the evaluators about the evidence that they are saying that they have found. This is really the evidence. We have a different understanding. There are different perspectives how we can get all this process together. The idea is that we really unpack all the issues, and we can really have a good learning in terms of having everybody embedded in this process. And this, of course, has to be transferred in new programs, in new projects, in new policies that are developed. And all this, because SDGs are the key direction, we have to be partnered this with different organizations, governments in the countries, and also with the UN family and with the banks and with all. I think we have an obligation, and COVID-19 shows an obligation with the increase of inequality and all this, that we have to accelerate learning and to do things better through, as has been said by the previous panelists, learning to do things better, different, and acknowledge what didn't work it and how we can do it better. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Farman, and very useful indeed points there. The importance of a good and strong M&E systems, and of course internally, reviewing and reporting on these learning, important learning events. So let me now turn to Chalmers. And I know that we didn't give you a lot of time since you started the ball rolling, but let me give you some time now to finalize your thoughts on this topic before we invite the audience. So if you can conclude your remarks, but then I would like to give you an opportunity from the point of view of your experience at Committee for Development Effectiveness to really just share with the audience on how we can ensure accountability for learning. Over to you, Chalmers.
Thank you very much, Martha. So I'll just say a little bit about the characteristics of a learning organization, just to talk a little bit more about this point about culture, which I feel is very significant for any organization that wants to be a good learner. So there's 5 characteristics for me of culture that an organization needs to have. Firstly, it needs to be humble, and it needs to recognize, therefore, that it doesn't have all the answers. This is particularly in the international development field, where if we knew all the answers, the field wouldn't need to exist. So clearly we don't know the answers, and we need to be humble enough to understand that and acknowledge that. Secondly, the organization needs to be curious. It needs to be curious in finding things out, in looking for new knowledge, new information, new answers. So curiosity is a critical aspect of the organizational culture. Thirdly, it needs to be open-minded. And it's very easy, particularly for us in the international development field, to get very caught up in our own dogma. Many of us would have studied a particular field through our education. We'll have been told this is the way things are. And it's very easy to get quite rigidly caught in that. And that blinkers us. The risk of that is that it blinkers us from new ideas and new ways of doing things. So being open-minded enough as an organization to look for new things, look for fresh ideas, and not always be caught up in our own preconceived beliefs as to how things ought to be done. The fourth characteristic is ambition. Ambition because we always want to do better. We always want to have more impact. We're never satisfied with the impact that we've had so far, even if it's been a positive impact, as it very often is. We're not satisfied. We want more impact. We want more. We're feeling more ambitious. And the last attribute that we need to have is impatience. We need to be in a hurry, because the cause of international development is a cause for people in the world who need help and have nowhere else to turn. And for us, we need to be in a rush. We need to help those people as quickly as we can. And however quickly we've done it, it won't be fast enough. So impatience is the key attribute there. So, and you asked me about my experience of chairing the Committee on Operations and Development Effectiveness. And it's a very interesting role to have. I think, and we see a whole range of evaluations that the independent evaluation team carry out of different types. And of course, a key interest that we have in that committee is the relationship between the lessons that an evaluation might come up with, and then what happens in the sort of heartbeat of the organization, the mainstream of the organization in response to those lessons. And I think the first concern we have is to avoid simply identifying superficial lessons learned. I think there's a risk that in the sort of routine of one evaluation after another, there's a risk that we just resort to a sort of generic set of lessons learned because it's easy to say and it's kind of always true in every situation. We must always communicate better. We must always coordinate better. It doesn't matter almost what the topic is. We can always come up with the same lesson. So the first thing is to move away from generic lessons that don't really take us forward. The second thing then is to, and Karen spoke about this earlier, is the communication between the evaluators and then the sort of implementers, if you like, the operational part of the organization, VP Sharif's part of the organization, perhaps we might say. You know, how is that communication going on? The learning really is not so much what happens once the evaluation report is written up and discussed in the committee. The learning happens as the report is being prepared, as those discussions between the evaluators on the one hand and the implementers on the other are discussing together, what is the actual lesson here? What is it that we could have done better that we didn't do? That's where the actual learning happens. And then the final point that I'd make, I suppose, is that we would like to see over time more effective impact, greater impact as a consequence of the results of this sort of process of developing evaluations and developing lessons. And that of course is a trend that changes over time. It's not something we can see immediate results on. But we do see results, and I think we're in a good place at the moment on this. So it's a very interesting set of factors to look at. Thanks, Martha.
Thank you, ED Chalmers. Now let me turn to you, VP Khaled, and ED Chalmers there ends on a note that really touches on what you do. So the relationship between evaluators and the work that you do. And I'm mindful that you were responsible for delivering enormous number of projects over the past couple of months in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And you have that interface with the client countries, with the regional member countries. Now, building on what has been discussed so far, I would like to ask you to share with the audience, and some of it you have already touched on it, but in a concluding way, if you can share how organizations can integrate learning and adaptive programming, given the ever-changing context introduced by the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course, other future events of this nature. Over to you, VP Khaled.
Thank you very much, Martha. So let me just say to your first question, obviously in our interactions with the evaluations department, Usually we are presented with a set of recommendations upon review of a particular activity. And these recommendations point to areas where we can do better, where we can have more impact in the future. And so obviously it becomes incumbent on all teams to implement recommendations made to make sure that that is the vehicle, one of the vehicles by which knowledge transfer actually takes place, because this is how we learn. But to your point on the COVID-19 interventions, we obviously have rolled out a very large number of operations benefiting about 42 of our regional member countries, whether they were new operations or we retrofitted operations specific to COVID-19 interventions. Now, this is an interesting example because obviously we are an institution well enabled and more than capable of designing and implementing budget support operations. So our history on doing budget support is well documented. We've done it in concert with various multilaterals over many decades. But the CRF, the Crisis Relief Facility type interventions that we implemented over the past 6 months are really unparalleled because they were much more stimulus than they were budget support. So when you do stimulus, it's obviously a situation where countries are in a particularly precarious situation, and we are providing stimulus in the form of fiscal support to either help the state deal with a fiscal deficit, to help with the private sector to avoid meltdown if shutdowns are pervasive. But the most important thing to recognize is that every one of our 54 regional member countries has a particularly different situation on tap versus every other country in the continent. So when we talk about our regional member countries, the assistance we provide the Big Six, which are the Big Six oil producers who, when oil reaches its lowest level on record in terms of export prices, and these 6 countries get about 70% of their revenues, both domestic and foreign, from oil. A specific intervention for each one of these countries is necessary. And even among those 6 oil producers, the interventions for providing stimulus will vary from the other one. Then you have other countries which are net oil importers, which will tend to have done better in the COVID situation, or net gold exporters with gold prices going through the roof, who would have also done better. So we had to tailor our stimulus interventions per the realities of the economic challenges of the country, each of which varied quite drastically. So how did we do this? Well, we obviously had to learn from the experience that we had in doing budget support in the past. We had to learn based on our country knowledge. We had to learn from working with our governments to better understand their challenges. We had to learn from interacting with our other multilateral donors to understand what their interventions are going to be. And together, we had to find a way of working as a team, both ourselves, the other multilaterals, our regional member countries, to come up with well-defined interventions specific to those regional member countries. Now, we will learn more about how successful we were in achieving our interventions as evaluations of each crisis relief facility, each of our budget support facilities becomes a topic of review. And then from there, we will also then be able to adapt to a next crisis. So just to close, when we come across an unparalleled crisis, and this was an unparalleled crisis, the COVID-19 crisis was an unparalleled crisis. The way you learn as to how you intervene in that situation is to draw also upon the expertise of having dealt with crises that may have been similar in the past, and to use the expertise you have available to you, both staff and consultants, to tailor the best interventions possible. every situation of crisis leads to knowledge. Every situation that leads to knowledge is obviously a learning experience. And this is how institutions learn to better define and refine every type of intervention they have. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you, VP Khaled. I think at this point, let me just remind the audience that after this session, I will open it up for questions, and you have an opportunity to post your questions through the chat on the Zoom, and we'll be able to answer you the questions which I'll pose to the panelists. So now, VP Khaled actually finishes on an important note there, Dr. Oku. Obviously, the issue of learning from past experience and learning from other partners within the same space was very useful as the bank handled the enormous amount of projects in response for COVID-19. Again, we look forward to reviewing these operations so that we can learn more to fine tune and sharpen the interventions, the bank's interventions. Now, I would like to, and of course, interventions by organizations of our type as well. So I would like to ask you to briefly respond to this question. And I know that this is something that you do. How do we invest in learning, and what mechanisms can be put in place to ensure that we have effective learning? Over to you. Your mic is mute. Your mic is mute. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Investing in learning takes more than just putting the money to enable the delivery of learning products. It involves creating an enabling environment that supports learning. It involves abilities to learning by the learners, also by the organization, and also by management. It involves creating a situation where there is inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, direct instructions, peer-to-peer learning, and all that. But most importantly, for investment in learning to be effective, it must be learner-centered. The learning should be in such a way that every learner feels happy learning. Every learner feels that they're acquiring new skills that will enable them deliver on the bank's business or the organization's business, and also enable their career growth within an organization. It must be personalized. So the times of doing learning, just taking something off the block and deploying it to staff, have long gone, as we have seen with COVID. Because during this COVID situation, analysis has shown that different categories of staff or different levels of staff, or even on a personal level, people are desiring to learn new skills that will make them relevant in the marketplace. So investment in learning must be personalized. It must show visible relevance to the organization's business, of course, because an organization doesn't just equip their staff for the benefit of the staff themselves. It first equips the staff to enable them deliver on the organization's business, and also for the staff to benefit in their career growth. It must be data rich. it must be adaptable, and it must be interdependent. As COVID has shown, operating or learning in silos is no longer serves the business. Learning must be interdependent within teams, within the organizations, within the deliveries that that organization sets out to deliver. So I think these are the ways that investing in learning now can enable not just the bank, but other development partners achieve their targets of development, enable that they are supporting governments and countries in designing and implementing sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in fact, you raised important points there. Investment in learning is much more than financing. It is about an enabling environment. Of course, it has to be personalized and adaptable. So lastly, let me turn to you, Mr. Furman from ILO, to also, just finalize, share your final thoughts on this, and to share with the audience one or two key lessons that you have that have emerged from your experience during the COVID-19 as an organization. Over to you. You're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Marta. Okay. Well, thinking about what we are learning these COVID-19 times, I think that in terms of learning, I think that we have two levels of learning that I think that we have to think about. One is how to do this kind of real-time learning. That means how we can learn to address the short-term perspective, what the needs now of our governments, our constituencies. And in that sense, our major learning has been to have a good social dialogue in which we sit together with our constituents and we really make the proposals and address the facts in a way which the organization can contribute technically, and listening to different actors, and we work together to promote social dialogue. This is, I think, something that ILO has found as very important as a lesson. And in terms of learning internally, is again, and as was said a bit by the previous panelists, there is no silos. We have to work together, and we have to work as a team to activate. If you think in a more long-term perspective, ILO, we are working in have a better normal, but it's not back to the normal. And in that sense, from the evaluation side, the contribution that we have to work is to capture from all the evaluation that we are doing, in all the reflection that we are taking, how the new COVID-19 situation or the challenges that the COVID-19 has surfaced and has put more clear than before in many countries can be addressed in programs and projects, and how we can learn from what we are doing. And that's we're coming again to this M&E, how we can insert key questions about, for instance, how we are addressing the new perspective capacity building, how we do training, how we work on consistencies somehow in the practical way, in a virtual term, and that was a big learning for all in the organization and our constituencies. But also how we make to put the agenda to the new themes that are there, and how this can be doing through the activities that we are already doing. So here, I think that here evaluation and learning are key areas in terms of challenges with new questions that not necessarily will have the answers, but we will put in the agenda the new questions, and then we start thinking in a different way that was maybe 1 year ago. Maybe not the questions are not new in terms of what are some key issues in the decent work and social justice, but how we are putting them in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Very useful. Now, at this point, let me open the floor for questions from the audience. And I have a question here from Kazim. He asks, how often are recommendations and lessons learned from an independent evaluation communicated to operations in order to prevent repetition of identified gaps in future similar projects? Have these lessons helped in project designs and implementation? I think, let me ask the acting evaluator general if she has the mic. I think this is something that she can start off, and then we can go to VP Khaled after that. Acting evaluator general.
Yes, thank you, Martha.
Yes.
So how often are recommendations and lessons from an evaluation communicated? The answer is always. Our evaluations, including their lessons, and I explicitly say lessons and not lessons learned, because these are often lessons to be learned. So the recommendations and the lessons are presented to the Committee on Operations and Development Effectiveness of the board, of which Edie Chalmers is the chair. And after we have presented our evaluation to the board, we publish it. So all of our evaluations are public, and they are published on our website. And we also produce a number of knowledge products, because the evaluation reports can be quite long and technical. So we do tend to produce products like 4-page briefs or 2-page highlights. And sometimes we also make a video. We organize learning events with the stakeholders that Mr. Furman mentioned. Stakeholders like colleagues in operations departments who are indeed an intended audience to learn these lessons and to take up these lessons in the design and implementation of future projects. So we do work together with the operations departments to promote learning from our evaluations by sharing the evaluation knowledge in different ways, depending on the audience, in order to speak to them and to answer the questions that they have, to provide the knowledge that they seek and that they need in order to design future projects. Now, whether these lessons have actually helped in project designs and implementation, I think indeed is probably best answered by VP Sharif, as it is indeed his colleagues, his complex, who we target in this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So over to you, VP Khaled. Have these lessons helped in project designs and implementation? You have shared quite a couple of them, but just to summarize, have you seen them helping in project design and implementation?
Thank you very much, Martha. So, I mean, obviously, to answer that question succinctly and correctly, it's just important for the audience to understand operations is the core business of the bank. So we traditionally prepare about 200 plus projects per annum. We have a supervision portfolio that can extend to 600-700 projects. So we have about 1,000 projects that are active at about one time or another. We also have economic sector work that can usually be between 200 to 300 pieces of economic sector work that we put together on an annual basis to prepare for projects. We also prepare between 75 to 120 project completion reports annually for projects that are closing. We obviously, then if we look at all of these different products together, we are looking at between 1,200 to 1,400 products that would need to be reviewed. But the evaluations department does not have the capacity to look at all of these things simultaneously. So we also have filters to ensure project quality at entry through our operations committee, better known as OPSCOM, through our senior management consultative committee, known as our SMCC. And we have a quality of entry check to make sure that we have learned from our previous mistakes. We also have filters to ensure that there is proper project quality at entry. And more, just as importantly, we have to learn as we exit particular projects. So for us, obviously, evaluations will look at our project completion reports, we'll look at our projects when they close, they will look at our economic sector work that prepares projects as we continue to develop them. And just as importantly, they will look at our strategies. They will tell us if our strategies are sound as they're being developed and as they're being rolled out and as they're completed. So there is a process by which different parts of the bank ensure that there is continuous learning, that there is continual quality checks throughout the process, and to make sure that everything we do, our project completion reports when our project close, are also monitored for quality. And this is a very important function of IDEV, because if our quality of projects or analytics of projects that are exiting our portfolio is not good, obviously there's no way to learn for projects that may be similar in the future. So operations is huge, and obviously to have proper evaluation of everything we do, we need a well-staffed and a well-budgeted evaluations department, a department that can handle the litany of things that we do on a regular basis to give us the direction and the guidance where we can do better. And I think we have a very good mix of how management ensures quality, especially at entry, and how our evaluations team ensures that our strategies are coherent, that quality at exit is coherent, that our vision for future projects makes sense, and together a system of checks and balances that works quite well. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you, VP Khaled. Thank you, Karen. Now, let's go to the next question, and it's about leadership. You mentioned, VP Khaled, that if we are to be successful as a learning organization, we need strong leadership. And Chalmers built on that as well, to highlight that as an organization, we need to be curious, open-minded, and ambitious as well. Now, to you, Chalmers, when you think about these characteristics that you highlight and the type of leadership that we need in order to have these characteristics as an organization, can you just share with us what you have in mind in terms of leadership in order to move forward an organization with these characteristics? And this question is from Karim.
Thank you very much, Martha. So my internet connection isn't completely brilliant today, so I didn't hear all of your question, but I think I got most of it. There's two different sort of ways to answer the question, I think. The culture an organization have, which then has those attributes that we've listed. The single most important determinant of that culture is the leadership, the senior leadership in the organization, both in terms of what senior leaders say, but also how they act. So the leadership is absolutely critical. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And the example that I gave of earlier in my career of an organization that turned around in quite a short period of time was in large part to do with in that example, which is nothing to do with the Africa Development Bank at all, but was in large part to do with a change of leadership. But I also think it's very easy for us to sort of resort to a position where it's only leadership, only senior leadership that counts. Only senior leaders can make a difference, and that I fundamentally disagree with. I think all of us as individuals, wherever we are in an organization, whatever position we're in an organization, have our own responsibility to have those attributes too. In the end, an organization is only a collection of the individuals that work for it. And each of those individuals need to be open to learning and looking for lessons in the work they do each day, and sharing those lessons and talking about them and understanding them. So it's very far from only the senior leaders that are important on this topic. And I think if we end up in a position where we focus purely and only on that, it's not fair on senior leaders, quite apart from anything else. All of us as individuals have our own responsibilities, and it's not that more junior people in an organization can sort of abrogate that responsibility just because they're relatively more junior. So this is about senior leaders, but it's also about everybody.
Thank you, ED Chalmers, and highlighting there the importance of everybody's role in making sure that we drive forward, the culture of learning for results, for development results. Now, let me turn to you, Dr. Oko, and to request you to answer the question, how do we avoid superficial lessons as an organization, as ED Chalmers pointed out earlier on, and VP Khaled also pointed to not misrepresenting facts. So as we learn, how do we ensure that we do that as an organization? Thank you.
Well, the best way to learn and to avoid superficialness is you learn from the past, you integrate into what you are doing, and then you build for the future. So you learn from what has worked, what made it work, how can it continue to work, what are the mistakes that have been made, why were those mistakes made? And how can those mistakes, what are the risks around not correcting those mistakes? And how do we move forward? And for me, I think this is where the role of evaluation comes in very appropriately to enable organizations' learning. So basically, if we learn from what we succeeded at, what we did not succeed at, it enables us to build our present and plan for our future. Also, what is the new knowledge that is out there? How can, as an organization, how do we adapt to ensure that we integrate this new knowledge in such a way that we become a vibrant and a continuously learning organization? What are the new skills? How can we learn from other partners? What are the good global lessons that we can learn and adapt into the system to ensure that we remain vibrant as an organization? How do we learn from our partners? How do we learn from even the countries that we operate in? How can we leverage those lessons? I think if we do all this, it will enable us to deliver in such a way that we run away from the superficial delivery and really get our hands deep and dirty into delivering in such a way that our learning makes impact. And I just also want to touch on leadership, like what Mr. Chambers said. Yes, it is true that top management sets the tone for leadership, but everybody in the organization is a leader in their own space. So if we know that we're leaders in our own space, What can we do in our own little spaces to ensure that there's a seamless culture of accountability that is built within the system? I think when we blend all of this, then our delivery and our learning becomes integrated with the bank's business and enables effective delivery. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let me turn to you, Mr. Furman. I think that the keynote speaker pointed to the fact that, you know, it's amazing that while we are under, you know, different regimes of lockdown at the moment, but we are still able to have this live conversation, connecting from different parts of the world. And therefore, I just want to have your thoughts on how you see automation helping us, or how we can leverage automation to help us learn in order to improve the performance of our organization based off the COVID-19 experience. This question is from Mutari. So how can we leverage automation for purposes of learning? Your mic is on.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think it's a timely question, definitely. I would say that as human beings, as organizations, as individuals, we have been faced to speed up automatization in terms of learning, for instance, because we move it from this idea of having meetings face-to-face and discussions, and I think that I will say the positive things, but I will say that it's not all positive. I don't think that we can automatize all learning, and still in the balance in the last months, you know, maybe about what is 9 months, 8 months, 10 and 10 months, a bit more, even that we are, as you said, some in different ways of lockdown. We have started, for instance, to do a lot of evaluations with virtual evaluators. We have meetings for mutual training of different organizations virtual. And all this has also some limitations. So first I will go to the strengths and then the perspective, and then I will come to some of the limitations that we should take on account. The fact that the human being is we are social people, we are social persons. So talking about the positive, the perspective is that we can accelerate learning, we can exchange among others, we can think how we can get more from the others in a more quicker time. But this needs also different learning skills on how to document, how to systematize, how to communicate in these different mechanisms that we have, like this Zoom, and the fact that we have some infrastructure limitations in some countries in Africa, and this is something that the bank is working, and I think, of course, has to be maybe accelerated, how to have better internet connections and all these kind of things. But also we have the other side of automation, that is about automation, that is about the automation of in supply chains, in process, how we can accelerate if you coming from the ILO, from the world of work, how we can be the future of work in this new process. And then we have a reskilling. And this is something that, again, I think that organizations like ILO and World Bank, we have to work more on that. We are working also with International Telecommunication Union on how to learn how to do this better in Africa. So all this is about how we can move. I think that we have a lot to learn in terms of how to accelerate this process. I mean, we have to make our constituencies, our organization, to learn how to work in this way. But we can do it, and we should do it. But this cannot be, let's say, cancelled we cannot cancel the real interaction between human beings. We have to see how to do this in a better way to make it more effective, because we are going to have more limitations in future, even with the after vaccination and all this. And one point that maybe we have not, something that we have not, I have not heard in the discussion now in this discussion a lot, and it's a concept that I think that should be more and more here, that it's South-South cooperation. The need to see how we can horizontally in Africa, we learn each other in a better way. We have a lot of spaces. We have the economical unit, we have the economical regional economic commission, we have the African Union, we have the bank. All these are partners in this process. But how we can strengthen this in this new scenario in terms of really learning, especially because we have, as we said before, we have to learn by doing immediately in terms of the COVID-19, and how we can move on that, helping each other in terms of different countries more. I would say that this should be part of this process of learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. These are very useful points you raise. And let me go to ED Chalmers and to ask you to respond to this very interesting question from Ian Hopwood. Ian says, if we apply all that has been said about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the conclusion should be that we were hugely ambitious for low-income countries, particularly after COVID-19, and that the funding and progress was already lagging behind, but after the pandemic, it should be enormous in terms of the gap. So now after the impact of COVID-19, do you think we should reformulate the SDGs so that they're more achievable and evidence-based? So what are your thoughts about that? Eddie Chalmers.
Thanks, Martha, for giving that question to me. I saw the question in the chat screen, so it's an interesting question, of course. So my view is that that COVID is not a reason to reformulate the SDGs. The SDGs are in the end, they're aspirational. They're trying that they're a mechanism through which the world as a whole is able to say what it would like the world to look like, or at least a stepping stone to what we would like the world to look like. And the fact that we've had the COVID experience does not invalidate the aspiration. But the writer is absolutely correct, of course, that it makes the aspiration harder to achieve, perhaps less likely to be achieved. But I don't think, for me, I don't think that in itself is a reason to change the aspiration. We may, of course, think the aspiration is wrong for various reasons, but that's not because of COVID. That's just for, other reasons. So, so my answer is that because something is harder to achieve doesn't make it wrong to want to achieve it. And essentially the SDGs are things that we want to achieve. We should still want to achieve them. We may have to work even harder, and we may find that the destination we want to get to is further away as a result of COVID, but we still want to get there, and we shouldn't take the pressure off because we've been through a crisis or in the middle of going through a crisis like COVID. That's not a reason to take the pressure off the objective. So that's my view on that, Martha.
Thank you, Eddie Chalmers. Now, let me turn to you, VP Khaled, and to ask you if you could respond to Clement Mensah. Clement says, for organizations such as multilateral development banks, whose ultimate success is equally dependent on those of the governments, learning together has to be central to optimizing development outcomes. From the perspective of African Development Bank, are deliberate efforts made to ensure that lessons learned cascade to other stakeholders, such as the governments? Over to you, VP Khaled.
Thank you very much, Martha. So obviously the answer to that question is of course. So I think everybody should remember that the African Development Bank, just like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, we design projects, but it is the regional member countries that execute those projects. So execution is not what we do. Implementation is what we do. So for example, we will design a project to build a bridge, but the procurement, the civil works, the implementation of that project, while monitored by our task managers, our procurement specialists, our consultants providing support on civil works, work in tandem with the regional member country. The regional member country is responsible for execution. They are responsible for dispersing the amounts that were provided. They are responsible to sticking to the letter of the agreement that was signed to allow those resources to flow. They are responsible for hiring the contractors in a fashion that is consistent with agreed upon procurement rules. They are also responsible for ensuring that the quality of the works being done meets the specifications that were laid out in the project documents. So learning isn't just a function of us. Learning is a function of our regional member countries as well. And so when we have weak capacity in a regional member country, a very weak or project management unit on the government side that doesn't have the technical capacity, that doesn't have the skill sets, that doesn't have the knowledge of how bank operations work, we provide training for people working on bank projects in the areas of procurement, in the area of disbursement, and across the board to make sure that those project management units responsible for execution execute effectively. So knowledge on behalf of the project management unit responsible for execution, knowledge of the objective of the loan, knowledge of how to properly execute, knowledge of how to properly implement all the clauses as provided within a project are actually key, because we want our projects to succeed. So our ability to implement, our ability to be successful is just as equally important that our regional member countries that are responsible for execution also have the same ability. So when we talk about training, training isn't exclusive to our task managers. It's also exclusive to the project management units that are responsible for executing our projects. Now, I wish I could say we provide training that is cutting edge for all of our regional member countries across the board. We do our best, but also remember that the capacity of one regional member country in a MIC may not be the same capacity that you might find in a fragile state. So there is a tendency to see more problems and projects in countries where the civil service, for example, is not well paid. In countries where the ability of governments to execute based on what governance situation a country is in is weaker than in another country where the presence and the foothold of government, especially in areas where our projects are being executed, is strong and allows for unfeathered implementation of project design. But we always take all of these factors into consideration at the design stage, make sure we can work with a regional member country, whether it's in a fragile state or in a middle income country, and make sure that our project management units are ready to be able to execute those projects. When we fail to do that, of course, the evaluations department finds that weakness, basically points to us, tells us how we could have done better, and this is also how we learn. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you, VP Khaled, and I think that was useful. Let me now ask, perhaps I'll give you an opportunity to raise, but start with ED Chalmers, because I think this one is something that he usually deals with. And then you can come in again on the same question. This question is from Magate. Sene. He is technical inspector at the Ministry of Water and Sanitation in Senegal. He's also a member of the Senegalese Evaluation Association. So he wants the panelists to come back on the issue of sometimes there are differences between evaluation exercise and an audit exercise in terms of findings about performance of projects. So what is your comment about that, and what would you advise? Your thoughts, please, Edie Chalmers.
Okay, well, I should say at the outset that I'm neither a professional auditor nor a professional evaluator. So, and I know there will be a lot of literature on this question. So my answer is the answer of an amateur, if you like, a layperson's answer. But my answer to that is that an audit is essentially looking at whether rules have been followed. The rules that an organization has, the expectations of standards, to the extent that they are quantifiable and measurable, have those been followed, have those standards been met? And the best audits are quite strategic. They take a step back from perhaps the day-to-day rules and standards, though they will certainly also look at that and look at a slightly bigger picture. But nevertheless, their sort of foundation is looking at rules. And an evaluation is primarily looking at impact. Did we have the success that we wanted to have in terms of a real world impact on whatever it is that we are evaluating? So it's looking at a different set of metrics. Evaluation is looking at what we wanted to achieve, and an audit is looking at whether we followed the right rules and systems as we were working to achieve something. So to me anyway, that's the difference. But I very much acknowledge that I'm not professionally trained on either of these two subjects. So there may well be much better, more accurate or correct answers than that one that I've just given. Thanks.
Well, it sounded like you are qualified in both. I mean, I'm also not qualified, so listening to you, it sounded like you are. But thank you very much for that response. Perhaps let me, before I go to VP Khaled, let me ask Karen, the acting evaluator general, to comment on this. Whether you find, some disconnect between what you find in evaluation and what you find in audits, and how you deal with that, if I may. Thanks, Karen.
I think that especially at the AfDB, the audit and the evaluation function complement each other quite well, and we make use of each other's work. We try to coordinate our work programs, and we are in regular contact with the audit department about the audits that they have planned, so that we can make use of any information they gather, and vice versa. So I wouldn't necessarily speak of disconnect, but rather of complementarity. And I think that Edie Chalmers has explained the difference between audit and evaluation very well. Audit tends to look at the what happened, and we tend to look at the how, by looking at elements like the relevance of interventions, their effectiveness, did they achieve their objectives, their efficiency, did they use resources efficiently, and are the benefits likely to be sustained? We look at performance in, I would say, a broader way. We look at what has worked, what has not worked, and more importantly, why. What were the factors that contributed to achieving the results, and what were the factors that hampered the results, and what can we learn from that? So I think that audit and evaluation can very usefully complement each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. VP Khalid, please.
Thank you very much, Martha. So, I mean, just to also follow on what Edie Chalmers and what Karen have also just said. But I think it's very important to understand that audit and evaluations also have two different terms of reference. So our audit department, for example, will audit the functions of, say, our 41 plus country offices to make sure that we are following all the required rules on managing things like petty cash, managing procurement for things that relate to office renovations, etc. So our audit department is looking for any possibilities of things that could be as serious as fraud, doing forensic audits of basically how monies were spent, looking at rules and stipulations for using and allocating resources within the bank itself, and within decentralized operations teams. So most of our audits do not go into specifically telling us how we can develop a better regional integration strategy, how we've implemented the Light Up Africa strategy. So, for example, with the Light Up Africa strategy, there are 160 million Africans in the dark. So, if our agenda in terms of implementation is to bring these people out of the dark, obviously we have a log frame, a specific approach in terms of how we get the resources, how we time our interventions, and then of course IDEV will tell us whether trying to get 160 million people out of the dark, given our own limited resources, how we partner with other multilateral agencies, whether our purse, for example, meets our ambition. And in many instances, multilaterals have huge ambitions and limited resources to accomplish those ambitions. And that's why ultimately you don't get the results that you require. So that is different from, say, how audit would look at our projects and how we've actually dispersed resources towards lighting up Africa. So if we have a project that's specific to providing turbines to a particular country, how were those turbines procured? Did resources go to a contractor on a competitive basis? How were the selections made? And then basically a forensic audit that ensures that issues related to governance, issues related to the proper management of financial resources are addressed. And so obviously there's a clear demarcation line between both of these roles. Back to you.
Thank you, VP Khalid. And finally, the final questions from which I think I would require you a minute each to respond to. It's a little bit technical, but just your thoughts. Sufi asks, how do you assess the trend of change in organizational effectiveness from your perspective? How should we assess the trend of change in organizational effectiveness from your perspective? And I'd like to start with Dr. Oku, just a minute or two to respond to that question, and then I'll go to Mr. Furman.
Okay, changing trends. When we talk about trends, like you said, it's a bit technical, but I will just focus on 3 or 4 trends that are affecting organizational effectiveness or will impact organizational effectiveness. And this includes ethical challenges, rapid technological change, a flattening world, sustainable business practices, and demographic trends. All these things will or have impacted organizational effectiveness, especially through this period that we are going through. In any organization today, whether we like it or not, we have become globalized. Information technology and managerial effectiveness have played key roles into informing the changing trends that organizations are embracing today. We're looking at IA, how can artificial intelligence inform changing trends in organizational effectiveness? How can we ensure that the processes that are being introduced now are continuous in such a way that they lead to organizational effectiveness and efficiencies? And digitization. Without digitization, none of us will be gathered here today. Last year, it would have been impossible to believe that the whole world will be operating virtually. But here we are. How do we ensure that trends like digitization have the ethical boundaries that are needed to ensure staff safety and organizational effectiveness? Thank you.
Thank you for those useful thoughts. Let me finally turn to Mr. Furman. Your thoughts, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, I would like to emphasize basically in a short time two different areas in which, I mean, how these trends of change can affect on organizational effectiveness. I was thinking a bit about the fact that we have social media, we have a kind of open society in terms of more voices are heard, want it or not. I mean, is this amplify a bit the voice of different groups, excluded. You have, I mean, all the informal sector, for instance, that has a clear voice in different ways, and how all this can be absorbed, let's say, and in the agenda, for instance, in terms of the agenda of labor issues and all this. I mean, we have seen a change, and how the informal sector is included in the discussions on the world of work, and how this is integrated in the agenda of government, of the unions themselves, and so on. So all this shows that there are different groups that are where some, and the migrants now, we have a lot with the COVID-19 and the effect of migrants that were remaining in places that were not there, and how you can, for instance, transform social benefits. I mean, so all these aspects for people that have been located in another country that is not their country, and things like it. All this is new challenge in terms of how we address to include all these groups, but also has been a great learning, I think, in ways to do it, to do that, and how to get involved in terms that maybe we, as for instance, ILO, were not so actively involved. So there is all this, and you have the social media also, a lot of public pressure also to address them. So I think that this is an area that we have to think a lot. And the other actually is about the ratification of the importance of social justice in any country. And this is because it's not all about innovation, it also should be about the ratification of key values. And in these values have to cross-cut, if you want, all the evaluation work also. How the evaluation can communicate to the organization that we are doing really the best social justice, how we can contribute the best to promote the social justice in the key areas that we have to address. Through the social media that is putting the good pressure in us, and in way of understanding how this evolves while the values remains as strong as has to be. Thank you very much. And thanks to all.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Furman. And thank you to everyone, particularly those who joined us through questions that the panelists have ably answered and shared their thoughts with us. At this point, let me thank ED Chalmers, VP Khaled, Dr. Oku, and Mr. Furman for being with us and sharing with us their thoughts on the topic, how organizations can become effective learners to achieve better development outcomes. And they have shared with us a range of issues that we need to take into account. And ED Chalmers started pointing out that humans are generally learners. So that's where we should start from. After all, organizations are made of human beings. And if we are to start improving or better, learning, then we need to start from there. But of course, as we discuss, as panelists discuss, it became very clear that there are some things that we shouldn't be doing as organizations if we're to be better learners for effective development outcomes. The issue of not misrepresenting facts, better confront the truth and deal with it so that it can inform your performance going forward. Avoid superficial lessons as we learn. Of course, there are things that we should be doing as organizations. They need to have clarity of mission. They need to have strong leadership, and they need to have a culture of success in organizations. And of course, as organizations, if we're to be effective, we need to be curious, open-minded, ambitious, as we take, the development agenda forward. We were also reminded that if we are to effectively deliver externally, as we implement development projects and interventions for the member countries, of course, we need to start from within by strengthening or building the capacity and the culture of learning internally. And of course, this has to be well resourced. It's not easy to learn effectively if we don't have the resources, both human and financial resources, because after all, to learn better, we need to have quality in terms of analytical work, quality in terms of evaluation, quality in terms of audit, and the rest of them. So we need to have these well-resourced. But at the same time, strengthening the monitoring and evaluation systems. These have to be good and strong so that they can help us capture progress and then document lessons so that we are better informed as we move forward. The learning has to be personalized and adaptable, like we have seen during the COVID-19. It was not easy, but we needed to make sure that we adapt to the challenge, and organizations need to build in that adaptability and flexibility. It's not just about investment, but creating investment per se, but creating an enabling environment for us to learn. Recognize that we can fail at some point, but then the speed and the with which we address that weakness is important. If we fail, let's acknowledge that, and then we move with speed to address those. So again, this is we have to be inclusive. While we learn as organizations, we should be mindful that there are segments of the population that may not be connected, the informal sector and others. So how do we leverage, available instruments, the social media and others, to make sure that we include everybody so that we don't leave anyone behind. At this point, let me thank you, Acting Evaluator General, for this opportunity, and the panelists and the audience for being with us. Over to you. Thank you. Is it Christine?
No, Martha, it's you. You can close the session.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, I have finalized the concluding remarks, and I was giving the mic to Christine. I think it's Christine.
No, it doesn't go back to Christine.
Give the mic to you, Karen, because our session ends now. So I've already concluded my remarks.
Yes, okay, fine. Let me then just thank all of our, both of our moderators, our keynote speaker, all of our panelists, and of course, all of you participants who participated and shared with us your comments and your questions. Let me also thank the team behind the scenes who has been moderating all of the questions received and tweeting on Twitter, and of course our interpreters for translating. So thank you all for participating in this opening session of the Evaluation Week. We hope that you will be able to join us for other sessions. There are 3 more sessions to go, one this afternoon on From Learning to Action, one tomorrow morning on evaluations that made a difference, and then tomorrow afternoon on the 40 years of evaluation at the AfDB. So thank you all again for participating, and hope to see you again at another session. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.